You're listening to Brainbuster Radio.
Welcome to Wrestle Thoughts Podcast. With us today is 4 times Emmy-winning entertainment reporter. He's got 61 million views on his YouTube channel with over 125,000 subscribers. You could call him the voice of Decker Drive. He's interviewed some of the biggest names in entertainment: John Cena, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Jason Momoa, Chris Jericho, and much more. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Van Vliet.
Hey, how are you guys? Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on.
It's great to be here. Now, I must point out my last name is pronounced Van Vliet, and it is a tough one when you look at it, I know. But yeah, it's Van Vliet.
We did have this discussion before. I've watched your stuff for a fair few years, and even though I've watched your things, I was like, I'm sure it's Vliet, but it's Vliet. Let's nip that in the bud now.
Okay, yeah. It's funny, because I used to start all my interviews being like, hey, it's Chris Van Vliet here at wherever location I am. And then I was like, that just seems too formal. So now I just start my interviews.
Well, maybe you should start doing it again, just so this doesn't happen.
Hey, I had Billy Gunn in my last interview that I posted say my name. He's like, if you don't subscribe to Chris Van Vliet's YouTube channel, I got 2 words for you. And I was like, okay, yeah.
I saw that.
Thank you, Billy. I appreciate that.
Brilliant.
Now that's annoyed me, because my last name's Johansson, but I'm constantly getting called Johansson, Johnson. So pronunciation's normally quite a big thing. So
likewise,
apologies for that.
My surname's McInnes, but I get McKines, McKins, everything else. So yeah, I understand your pain.
We are all on the same page. So I get it. If when my ancestors came over, my last name's Dutch, so when my ancestors came over, if they had just made my last name Vanvleet, I would never have any of these problems ever. But now I'm constantly saying, no, it's Van Vliet, like fleet or whatever, meat. The one-man fleet, Chris Van Vliet. That should be my name.
Love it. That's an easy way to remember. So how's it going? What's going on at the moment in the world of Chris Van Vliet?
There's a lot, going on at any point for any of us. We're all super busy, I guess, in general. But today, after we do this podcast, I'm going to go to a local wrestling show about 10-15 minutes away at Gangrel's Wrestling School. And he's bringing in the Headbangers. He's bringing in Shannon Moore. So I'm going to do some interviews there. So after this, I'm going to write down my questions, do a little bit more research, and then head over to Gangrel School. And by the way, Gangrel is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. Not just nicest wrestler, just nicest people. And he has a wrestling school here in South Florida that's top notch. And there's a lot of wrestling in South Florida, but he has probably one of the best schools maybe in this side of the country. So yeah, go to that school and yeah, it should be good. I haven't put out a wrestling interview in a couple of weeks, so I'm happy to be getting back into it.
That's awesome. So in one day you're getting interviewed and doing some interviews as well?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Sounds better than our day, doesn't it? So,
yeah, we're going to pub after this.
We're going to the pub later, yeah.
Hey, that sounds okay.
It's Jamie's birthday weekend.
It is my birthday weekend, so we're going to enjoy ourselves tonight.
How old are you, Jamie?
We don't need to talk about how old I am.
Oh. What is the drink of choice?
I might be 35, Chris, but, we'll...
Well, I also might be 35, so, we got that in common.
Oh, well, there we go.
Yeah, so just a bit of a background for you and for the listeners that may not be as familiar with your work. How is it that you got started in the interviewing business, not just wrestling, but like I said in the introduction, you've interviewed some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. So how did you get into interviewing?
I've been so supremely blessed, and I'm so grateful to have the job that I do. So, a lot of people might be familiar just with what I do on YouTube, and, my channel's gotten so much bigger over the last year, which is just crazy to me. But my day job is I'm a TV host, or as you might say, a TV presenter. I host a show here called Deco Drive. It's an entertainment show in South Florida, and I've been so fortunate to be able to interview, massive celebrities. I've been to the Oscars 5 times. I've been to the Grammys 4 times. So how I got started was I always had this passion for broadcasting. I always thought it was really cool to watch, the great broadcasters on TV or on the radio, and I just thought I could do that. I'd love to do that one day. And when I went to university, I'm originally from Canada, so when I went to university, I kind of had this epiphany. Like, I woke up one day and I was like, when school ends this year, it's not about like drinking and having fun and, just partying it up all the time, which is what university is, mostly about. And you learn some stuff as well. I kind of realized that, like, when the year was done, I was going to have to like work for like the next 40 or 50 years of my life. So while I was getting some education and learning, the basics of, I have a communications degree. So while I was learning the basics of that, I kind of realized that, like, I needed to step outside of what I was learning in the classroom and figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I didn't want to be one of those people who hated waking up on Monday and hated going to work. I wanted to do something that didn't feel like a job. So I reached out to all the different radio stations in my college town. And there was a TV station that had volunteers that worked in the control room and worked in the studio. And I kind of just got the ball rolling from there. I got a job as like a camera guy and like a bunch of, like, a floor director, a bunch of these other like technical jobs at a TV station. And I reached out to this radio station and they said, sure, you can come on our street team and hand out stickers at events. And, like, one of the events happened to be a wrestling show, which fit perfectly because I've been a lifelong wrestling fan. And then this one radio station said, we can't bring you on as a volunteer. It's just not how our insurance works, but how would you like a job? And I'm like, okay.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I got hired on, like, pushing the buttons at a radio station. They call it a board operator. And the ball just kind of got rolling from there, from having, like, basically just having the wherewithal to just reach out to these people and to say, here's what I want to do. Here's what I'm willing to offer. And I got these opportunities, and an internship at a small TV station turned into a job, and I started, as a news reporter. And I was doing interviews as a news reporter, and I realized that I was 22 at the time. I didn't want to do news for the rest of my life because it was super serious. And if you've seen any of my interviews, I'm not exactly the most serious person. So, the ball kind of got rolling from there. I've been able to live my dream of being on television now for the last 15 years. And that entry-level TV reporting job turned into a larger show on MTV2 here in Canada. And then from there, I was just hosting other entertainment shows, and which kind of went along with that was interviewing. And it's been a really, really fun ride. And I still, it's Saturday right now as we record this, and I'm pumped to go to work on Monday. Like, how many people can say that? And I'm
not me.
Not us.
Not us.
No.
Well, then you gotta change something then. Yeah.
No, that's awesome though. Like, you can wake up every day and still have that much passion about what you're doing. Even 15 years later, that's something I really do envy. Hopefully someday we will find that ourselves. But
Well, I've been doing my job for 15 years and I still hate getting up on a Monday.
Well, I think that this is kind of the key, and I've been kind of, I had that epiphany, that moment when I was in university, but I've been thinking about this, for the better part of my life, where it's like we work more than we do anything else in our life. And we spend so much time looking for that perfect partner, that boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. And we spend so little time looking for a job. And we're just like, yeah, good enough. It pays the bills. And I feel like that just seems so backwards to me, because we spend more time with the people we work with, and we spend more time doing our job than we do anything else in our life.
that's so
And
true.
I said this to somebody at work the other day. I actually said that exact thing. I said, I see you more than I see my actual friends and family.
Yep.
And it's so true. It's so true.
And then you think about how little time and effort and thought you put into, for a lot of people, into the job that you have. And it just seems really backwards. And just for me, it was like, I'm going to go after this thing. At 21, I was chasing after it. And I'm like, if I don't accomplish this, that's okay. but at least I can, be 60 or 70 or 80 or whatever and look back and go, when I was 21, I tried. I pulled out all the stops, called all the people I could, put in my best effort, and it didn't work out, but it's not my fault, and that was kind of it. And I was, really lucky that having that passion and that drive has really continued throughout my career.
That's awesome. Like I said, that is something that I hope I can get one day. I am actually in a job right now which I would consider my dream job. I still find it hard to get out of bed some days to go, but it sounds like from what you've done is you've done a little bit of everything in what you do, like in the entertainment industry. You said you've worked from the bottom to where you are now.
Yeah.
And, like, how has that affected? Like, do you think seeing how everything works in the entertainment industry has helped? Like,
yeah, definitely. And it's not just the entertainment industry; it's just broadcasting in general. And I think you could draw a parallel here to wrestling. And you see a lot of guys when they go to wrestling school, they've got to help build the ring, or maybe they have to be a referee during some of the matches in the wrestling school. And it helps you learn every different element and every different angle of the business. So for me, in my first job, when I was that TV reporter in a small town called Peterborough, Ontario, and I was living at my parents' house still, and that was 100 kilometers away. So I was driving over an hour each way, and I lived in Canada, so sometimes there was snow and it took over an hour. So it was like I was grinding it out to get there, and I was what they now call a multimedia journalist, but like a one-man band. So I was shooting the interviews, and then I was having to edit them myself, and I would also have to write the stories myself, and then you'd also have to report on the stories yourself, and then on weekends I was also the anchor of the newscast. So like you're wearing a whole bunch of hats, which makes you have a massive appreciation for all these jobs when you do get to a larger station and you only have to do one of those jobs.
Yeah, going back to what you said about like if you're an independent wrestler, you do little parts in the company, like you're a referee, you set up the ring. I did actually train to be a wrestler when I was 16 until I was 20, and I wrestled some matches and I did set up the ring, I refereed shows. You have to pay your dues, as it's called. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, just doing those other spots, I learned so much more than I would have done if I'd just trained. Like, just learning how to put up the ring, learning how to referee, learning how even the music production works, like how people produce the shows. Every single hat in the company, you wear it and you learn so much more, so much quicker, and you have such a bigger appreciation of how it all works.
Well, and it gives you a greater appreciation now as a fan too, and it's
Absolutely.
so easy. It's so easy to be, in the stands watching a WWE show or an indie show, and talking to the person sitting next to you about what they should be doing. Well, they know what they're doing.
That's very true.
And maybe you don't agree with it, and I certainly don't agree with everything that's going on, with all the WWE bookings. But they have a reason for this, and you just need to realize that they do know what they're doing, and they make billions of dollars doing this.
Yeah, there wouldn't be a $1 billion company if they didn't know what they were doing. They're doing something right. Yeah.
I always, as a fan, just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Well, it's WrestleMania right now, and I said this the other day on Twitter. Like, I'm just taking off my cynic hat right now, and I'm just going to enjoy the ride to WrestleMania, because it's WrestleMania. We're all fans. We all enjoy WrestleMania. Let's just enjoy it. Let's not try and pick it apart. Let's just hope that WWE know what they're doing and try and enjoy the wrestling. It's really hard to do that sometimes, but
that is easier said than done.
It is,
for sure. Yeah,
for sure.
Everyone has their fantasy booking of how it should go down.
We do, yeah. I mean, it's what we do on a weekly basis on the podcast. We do fantasy book a lot of things, and we're like, oh, this is how it should be, thinking like if we were doing it ourselves, the product would be 10 times better.
We basically think we should be on the creative team.
Yeah, we do, don't we? But
well, doesn't every
wouldn't be a $1 billion company if we were. No.
We'd probably go bankrupt in a week. But
speaking of wrestling, Chris, you said a minute ago you was a lifelong fan. When did that actually start? I mean, was there a company? Was there a wrestler? I mean, when was the day you became a fan?
My earliest memory is going to my grandfather's house, and it was Saturday, and he'd just have WWF on, and I didn't know a ton of the characters at the time, but I was just blown away by the larger-than-life personas and the bright colors and the athleticism. but it was really at like 15, 16. So if we're around the same age here, it was, Attitude Era. So we're talking 90, 97, 98, 99. That was when I really got into it. And I, one of my best friends at the time watched every single Monday night, and I was like, what are you watching this crap for? I mean, come on. And I was an amateur, I was a high school wrestler at the time. And when you're a high school wrestler, you're not supposed to like, the quote unquote fake stuff.
Yeah.
And I just got sucked into that world. I was just so blown away by everything that was going on at that time. And that was a pretty exciting time to dive back into it. So I watched everything.
Bad time to come in as a fan, was it?
Oh yeah. So I watched Raw on Monday, and I would switch over to Nitro during commercials, and then I'd watch SmackDown, and I'd watch ECW, and I'd watch Thunder and Metal and Jacked and Heat, and I watched everything, and I would tape it on VHS and rewatch it the next day.
We've all been there. I think that was such a good time to be a fan, which is like nowadays. I think nowadays is almost like the Attitude Era. It's that we're so spoiled as fans again now.
There's so much choice.
It's the best time to be a fan right now since the Attitude Era.
I agree, and I've said that in a lot of interviews, and I've gotten a lot of crap for it in the comment section on YouTube, but I firmly believe, I think this is the most exciting time to be a wrestling fan, and for me it has to do with accessibility. If this was 1998 again, and you were telling me about this great match that had happened on a pay-per-view or on ECW or on Raw, the only way I'd be able to watch that is if you lent me your VHS tape.
Yeah, which what we've been there.
Right. Like, we were all tape traders back in the day. Some people were even mailing them to each other. Now you tell me about this great match and I pull it up on YouTube in 2 seconds and can watch the whole thing. And that's why I think it's so exciting, especially if you're coming up as a wrestler. You have so much to draw on. You can watch matches from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and obviously stuff that's going on now, and not just stuff that was televised. Every independent show has someone with a video camera, an iPad, or an iPhone that's recording the match, and you can see literally every match that's ever happened now.
That's why I love the WWE Network so much as well, because I'm a big old school fan, and I'm sat only of night watching the first ever Starrcade, and I'm just sat there like a little kid, like, this is the greatest thing. I'm like watching Ric Flair versus Harley Race in the steel cage. It's just, like you said, it's the accessibility. It's just everything's there for a fan.
It's really hard not to take it for granted as well, because like you said, Chris, back in the day you had to be a tape trader or in those tape trading circles to be able to see the wrestling that was going on in Japan or in the UK or in America. You'd have to trade the tapes, but like you said, you just go on YouTube now and type in Will Ospreay versus Ricochet, and there you go, you've got 10 matches of theirs, and it's so hard not to take it for granted. But going back to what you said about how easy it is how good it is for the wrestlers now to be able to draw from this pool of videos they can watch to learn and study. It's also great for them in terms of social media, how they can put themselves out there as well. Because there's so many wrestlers that would have gone by me if it wasn't for social media. Like, I'll see these GIFs of people doing really cool spots, and I'm like, oh, who's that? And then the next day I'm the biggest fan. And that's because of like Twitter and Instagram and stuff like that. So how important do you think it is for younger wrestlers to have a social media presence?
I think it's super important for branding. I think just to get your name out there and to just show people exactly what you're talking about, to show people what you're capable of. And it's, you think back to even just 10 years ago, if you were an independent wrestler trying to get booked on a show, you had to show up at that show and then maybe put on a little bit of a clinic maybe in the ring to show someone what you were capable of. Now you can just send clips, YouTube clips, and go, this is who I am. And you're so right. Now I can go online and I can be a fan of a wrestler that I've never seen wrestle in person. And I may never see wrestle in person. And I think that that's what's super exciting. And I think that we're just in the tip of the iceberg of this right now. YouTube's only really been around as we know it today for 10, 12-ish years. So I think that we're just on the cusp of this turning into something way bigger. And I'm going to put it out there. I think that at some point in time, maybe 5 years, 10 years from now, we're going to be watching a large wrestling company. I don't know if it's WWE or it's AEW or someone else. I think we're going to be watching them on a streaming service on a certain day at a certain time. I just think that that's the way that the world is going.
That's a really interesting take.
I think we discussed that on one of our previous podcasts. We spoke about AEW and whether or not they're getting a TV deal, and then we spoke about if they need a TV deal or if something like Netflix or Amazon Prime would be, or YouTube Red would be the way to go. I know NWA with the £10 of gold, they're happy doing things through YouTube, so they might be the first one to bring.
Impact is on Twitch.
Yep.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right with that.
I think we're going to see AEW on TV, and I think that wherever AEW lands, it's going to be so critical and so pinnacle to their success. Nothing against Impact Wrestling, but if AEW lands on Destination America or Pop, which are stations that, let's be honest, no one had ever heard of before Impact Wrestling landed on them.
Yep.
If AEW goes there, I think that we know the direction of where AEW is going to be headed. If AEW lands on a cable network or something that we've actually know, like TNT or TBS, which I know you guys might not be familiar with those stations, but that's like TNT was where and TBS was like where WCW was. If they can land on a station like that, I think that it's going to mean great things for them. But the thing we got to remember here is, and I work in television, so it's kind of scary for me to say this, but people don't turn on the TV for appointment viewing. They don't go, oh, it's 8:00 on Monday, I need to be watching Raw right now, which I know a lot of people do. But a lot of people can go, well, I can DVR it, or I can watch it. I can watch the clips of it later on YouTube, or the really good stuff I know is going to be on Twitter or YouTube or Instagram. It's just such a different landscape now. And while I think a company like AEW is going to start on a network like that, I think that they're going to shift to go somewhere else.
Well, speaking of All Elite Wrestling, while we're on the subject, I did actually post a tweet a couple of weeks ago saying I think you'd be a perfect fit as an interviewer or personality for All Elite Wrestling. Is that something you would be interested in if there was an offer made or there was interest?
And thank you so much for saying that. No,
I mean it absolutely. I think you're a great fit.
And it's, I chatted with Billy Gunn in our interview a little bit about it. I kind of jokingly threw it out there, but I've chatted with him a little bit. I've been trying to set up an interview with Tony Khan for the last couple of weeks. He's actually in London, and he has been for a while. So when Tony gets back here to Florida, where he lives, we're going to make an interview happen. And maybe I'll slide in a little suggestion there. But I would have to guess as they headed towards Double or Nothing, they probably got that all figured out. They probably already have at least their talent lined up for that. If it could work out for me to work for AEW or maybe even WWE one day, sure, absolutely. But I've got a job right now, and I'm under contract for the next 2.5 years at the TV station that I'm at. So it would have to be like a job that I would go to either on weekends or like a once a month type of thing. But yeah, certainly I would be open to that. Here's the thing though, I love the style of my interviews. And we can get into that, if you want, but my style is basically like what we're doing right now. We're just chatting. We're having a conversation. I'm allowing the wrestlers to be who they are and, hopefully answer some questions that they've never been asked before. And if you're a backstage interviewer for any of these companies, that's not really what you get to do. You're reading from a script. And, what I think my strength is, getting wrestlers to give us news and news that happens to, make its way onto a lot of these dirt sheets, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
When you work for
you doing the robotic WWE style of interview.
Yeah.
Because
ladies and gentlemen, my guest at this time.
Yeah, exactly. And then having to do that confused look they do after every interview, where they just stare into the camera. I can't imagine you doing that. Because when you interview people, it's always like you've known them for about 10 years. Like you're actually friends with these people. And I'm sure you are to some degree. But you know what I mean? It always seems so friendly when you're interviewing them.
Well, I think that, I think that it took me a little while to kind of figure it out, but they're just like us. Like all celebrities are just like us. And if you approach it like you're in awe of them or that they're better than you, they're going to read that from you and they're going to speak to you on a different level. And, we've all been wrestling fans our entire life. And I actually did a little bit of wrestling training for a couple months when I was in university. So I kind of get it. I'm not certainly not a wrestler, but I've been in the ring quite a bit as a ring announcer. I just feel like if you can treat them like they're on your level or you're on their level, they're going to respect you so much more. And that's just always been my approach to interviews. I don't want them to sound like interviews, which is why I don't start my interviews very formally anymore. I'll start the camera rolling and then we'll just have a conversation. And the next thing you know, 20, 30, or sometimes 40 minutes have passed and we've covered a whole bunch of topics.
I think one of my favourite interviews you've done is on that same subject is with Johnny Gargano, where you're actually at his house. And it's just such a natural conversation. Like, that's one of my favourite ones that you've done. And you could tell Johnny was at ease, and so were you. You were just having a chat as friends. And when you're doing it like that, you actually get so much more discussed. And, you know, it's like, I don't know. I think that's kind of like what we're doing now, I'd hope. Like, just having a conversation, just like four human beings having a chat, you know?
No, and it's funny how much media has shifted. You know, it was a couple of years ago, we were all talking about how shorter videos were better. And, you know, YouTube videos, our attention spans are so short now because we all have devices in our hand. And 6 second Vine videos. That's where the world's going that way. And sure, that did work for a little while, but you know, now that we have like what we're doing right now with the ability to podcast, and YouTube is really favoring longer videos, as I'm beginning to realize. It's so interesting that when you give someone a chance to actually talk and allow their thoughts to fully, you know, evolve and get processed, it's such a different conversation. When you know, a 3-minute interview versus a 3-hour interview, or even, you know, a 43-minute interview, they're completely different. Your thoughts can fully form.
Yeah, like there is a place for longer form content now opposed to the short form content. I used to be all about watching the clips of like 3-minute interviews because I could digest them quicker. But now if you used to ask me, I'd rather listen to a longer interview. And I don't know what changed. I don't know if it's because YouTube allowed the longer videos. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The people seem to be wanting the longer content now. And I think we've even found that ourselves, haven't we, recently? We're trying to do, well, like with these interviews, we tried to make them about an hour or over an hour, because when we were putting up shorter videos and shorter podcasts, people weren't really listening or paying attention. So I think it's kind of the same with YouTube.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, like, you know, getting interviews is not an easy thing. And WWE will often only give me, like, I did a bunch of interviews at Royal Rumble Access, and they'll give you like 3, 4, 5 minutes. And if I was thinking, if that's all I'm going to get, then that's all I'm going to get. We got to make the best of it. And like the comments were just completely filled with like, why was this so short? And I'm like, I know it's not my fault. I'm working with what I was given, but you're so right.
Yeah, exactly. You want to work with what you're given, and we've discussed it with one of the like local wrestling promotions, WrestleGate Pro Wrestling, and we've discussed, even when we attend the events, even if it is 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes interviews, it's about making the best of those 4 minutes to hope that individual wants to come on your podcast in the future, that they want to discuss their career in more depth for the 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So 100%, sometimes it's a shame that you can only have 5 minutes, but it's making those 5 minutes count and try and make something better in the future.
Yeah,
that's what life is all about, right? Yeah, it was funny. I was asking Cody Rhodes what the best advice from his dad was, and he said, make your minutes count. And he was talking about if you only had a 3-minute match, you had a 13-minute match. Dusty told him, make your minutes count, make the most of those minutes. And I feel like that could just be applied to life.
Oh, definitely. In so many things, like in everything, in everyday life, that could be applied to. If you've only got 3 minutes, like you said, Kurt, make the most of it. It's what we're trying to do as well. I think.
Make them remember them 3 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing I did want to ask about is you have got a very successful YouTube channel. When did that start, and what was your motivation to do the YouTube channel? Was it when you realised that YouTube was the place to be over, say, the other streaming companies like Dailymotion? Or was it like you'd seen other people doing it and you thought, oh, I could do this but with wrestling? And what was it that inspired you to do the YouTube account for Chris Van Vliet?
I'm going to be honest. It was kind of an accident, which is, it's the happiest accident ever because it's now turned into, a whole bunch of subscribers and a bunch of views. But I'd been doing these celebrity interviews since like 2007, I guess was when I started doing just celebrity interviews with part of my job. And my co-host in the show was like uploading a few of her interviews to YouTube, and some of them were getting like tens of thousands of views. And I thought, well, if I've got interviews that I'm proud of or segments I'm proud of, I would just want to put them up there. At least it's like they can live forever, because kind of the way television works is it airs once and that's the end of it. At least that's how it was in 2007. And so I threw some stuff up, and that was, some stuff got a couple thousand views, and that was great. And these were interviews with like bands, and I was doing a lot of music stuff at the time. Actually, in 2007, I had my very first wrestling interview with Bobby Lashley, which I never ended up saving. It was not a very good interview at all. But you got to start somewhere. So that YouTube account, I kind of put some stuff on it and kind of forgot about it, and I think I forgot the password to it, and that just it's still out there. I don't remember what the name is of it, but in 2011. I started up a new YouTube channel under my actual name. It wasn't a username. It was Chris Van Vliet. And the same thing. I was just putting stuff up there just because I wanted it to live on after it aired on TV. And I was living in Cleveland at the time, of course, the home of Dolph Ziggler and The Miz. And I was able to do like the occasional wrestling interview. Like we'd have people come into town for Raw or SmackDown, and they'd come into the TV station to do an interview to promote the show. And I figured instead of like the 10, 15, 20 seconds we're going to put on TV, just a sound bite, I'm going to do like a full interview with this person, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And since we're not going to be able to air all that, I want it to live somewhere. I want people to be able to see this somewhere. If I'm a wrestling fan and I'm asking questions that I want to know the answer to as a wrestling fan, someone else must enjoy this. So I started putting stuff on my YouTube channel, not even thinking about like, that anyone else would really, search for it or find it or anything. And I did an interview with The Miz. He was throwing out the first pitch of the Cleveland Indians game, and I had like a 3-ish minute interview with him. And it was right around when CM Punk dropped the pipe bomb. And I asked The Miz about it, and he gave me this great comment. He said it was the most exciting thing since the Attitude Era. And he also told me that like he got concussed during his match at WrestleMania 27, which both of those were things he had never talked about, and it was newsworthy. So I just posted this on my YouTube channel. I think I tweeted about it, didn't think anything more of it, and I woke up the next day, and I had 6,000 views in this interview.
Wow.
And I'm like, I had like 12 subscribers. I'm like, what? Like, something must have happened here. And I looked into like the analytics, and I saw that a couple of dirt sheets had picked it up. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then I went to sleep that night, and then the next day it had 36,000 views. And I'm like, wow, like we're onto something here. And that's kind of when like the wheels started turning in my head that like, all right, I've got something here. I've got the access to these people, so I might as well, try to do these interviews when it's possible. And so that was 2011. So that's 8 years ago. I was just doing these when the wrestlers came to town. So I was uploading maybe 2 or 3 or 4 wrestling interviews a year. And I just kept gaining traction as the years went on. Then I was kind of going out of my way to get, 5 or 10 wrestling interviews a year. And then last year, I just kind of went all in. No pun intended. I went all in on the wrestling interviews, and I said, I'm going to do 40 wrestling interviews this year. If it means me driving around to do them, or it means me having to fly somewhere to do these, I want to really build up my YouTube channel. And I think at the start of last year, I had like 50-ish thousand subscribers, which to me was still mind blowing. That everyone else shares this passion of wrestling that I have. And then by August, I had 100,000 subscribers, and or I think September, and it's just kind of been chugging along since then. And I kind of live my life by this phrase that's really like shaped my life, and it's vague goals get vague results, and specific goals get specific results. So I was very specific about I want to do 40 wrestling interviews this year, and I did more than 40. And now this year I want to do 50 wrestling interviews. And I think that if you can set a very specific goal for yourself and you actually have something to work towards, it makes it that much more accomplishable.
That's really good, actually.
Yeah.
Specific goals get specific results. That's probably something we should.
Some advice we can take on board.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's so true, because if you say, like a lot of people have New Year's resolutions, a lot of people go, I want to lose some weight this year. Well, if you lose 1 pound, congratulations, you've lost some weight. But if you say, I want to lose 15 pounds by June 30th, well, now you're accountable to not only a number, but now you're accountable to a date as well. And if you put that out there into the world, if you tweet it out, or, you put it on Facebook or whatever, now you're accountable to a whole bunch of people for this. And I think that was, for me, the real game changer, was realizing that, not only do I love wrestling, not only do I love chatting with wrestlers, and, it's amazing that other people appreciate it as well, but I realized that there was a real audience for it. So the more I could do of these, and if you've seen some of my interviews, I've gone out of my way a lot to do interviews. Like the interview I did with Chris Jericho in the back of the car, I drove 4 hours each way while my buddy was editing the interview on the drive home. The computer died. We had to stop at a gas station to plug in the computer to finish the editing. Like, I flew to last month. I flew to New York City for 2 hours. It's a 3-hour flight from where I live in Miami. I flew to New York City for 2 hours to interview David Otunga, and then flew right back home. So, like, I've been going out of my way. Like, if someone's going to give me the opportunity to do an interview, I will absolutely do it. So if it's driving several hours, if it's flying somewhere, if I'm already somewhere for work and I can stay an extra night to do an interview. Yeah, I've basically been doing it. If someone gives you, if someone gives you just a little crack of the door open, I try to kick down that door and open that door and, make an opportunity.
Taking every opportunity you can.
You got it. And I think, yeah, you got it.
Yeah, you'll only get out of what you put into it. So I think the 3-hour flight to New York for a 2-hour interview, for 2 hours, probably worth it.
Yeah, definitely.
Going back to the advice, I really did like the specific goals. So for other anybody that's wanting to get into broadcasting or interviewing or just podcasting, what other advice would you give them, Chris?
I think you got to do it. I think that's the biggest thing. I think that a lot of us talk about doing these things, and a lot of us have great ideas knocking around in our head, and that's awesome. But if someone else is doing the thing that you want to do, and if someone else is successful at that thing, there's no reason that you can't be too. You got to realize that someone who's successful at this, like if my YouTube channel is even a moderate success right now with the subscribers and the views that I have, you need to realize that it always hasn't been this way. It started off super small, and I had interviews that weren't even getting hundreds of views for a while. I think you just got to go out and you got to do it. And if you have an idea in your head, you have to chase after it. And I think with YouTube specifically, I think it's important to realize that way too many people are trying to be famous, or they're trying to be influencers, or they're thinking that they're the star of the show. And I think that is a completely wrong way to approach this. I actually think YouTube should be called ThemTube, because if you're making your content about you, not many people are going to care. No one's tuning in to your video about some person that they've never heard of. I think you got to provide value. And, the thing that I think that my YouTube videos do is they provide value, giving insight to these wrestlers that, people might not see, or they're talking about things that people might not have heard about before. I think you got to figure out what your goal is there. Like, what am I going to do? What's the basis of my channel, or if it's a career, whatever that's going to be. Figure out how you're going to be able to provide value. And I think that the followers and the likes and the clicks and the views and everything else will come after that.
Yeah, but to give credit where credit's due, though, you said people are coming to listen to you for the people you're interviewing, but there's so many interviewers out there now where they could go to all these different places, but 61 million views you've had on your YouTube channel? You've got 125,000 subscribers. I think it is a case of you've put yourself across where people actually would prefer to listen to you interviewing those than another way. So I think the way you've built your own portfolio makes you the draw for a lot of fans like myself and Callum and Jamie.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. For me, I've never made my interviews about me, and I think that that's the biggest problem. That, if we're going to talk about interviewing specifically, I think a lot of interviewers, they're not used to being in front of a camera, they're not used to holding a mic, and they either A, get nervous, or they get too excited. And I think I see this comment all the time on my YouTube videos, and it blows my mind. But people are like, thanks for actually letting the guests talk. And I'm like, yeah, of course I let them talk. Like, I'm very aware that no one is clicking on my videos to hear anything that I have to say other than setting up, a question for this person. Like, sure, I might ask, interesting questions, but no one is clicking on a Chris Van Vliet interview to hear anything that Chris Van Vliet says. They're clicking on my videos to hear the product of the questions that I'm asking. So I think that that's a big thing, is like just realizing what your place is here. If my video is with, like, I'm interviewing the Headbangers today, no one is clicking on a Headbangers interview to hear my take on anything. So I think that you need to keep that out of it. And I think a lot of people will ask a question. They'll go, well, what do you think about Kurt Angle fighting Baron Corbin at WrestleMania? And then they give their answer. They go, well, actually, here's what I think about it. It's like, well, that's not what an interviewer is supposed to do.
Yeah. The interview is to hear what the subject is talking about. Like, that's what I mean. Like, when we announced that you were going to be on the podcast today, we did actually have quite a lot of interaction from people saying, oh, can you ask him this? Can you ask him that? So I think to a degree, people do actually want to hear what you have to say, but I guess it's different when you're the subject of the interview. So, right. Yeah, I think people do care what you have to say. That's why we've got quite a few questions to ask you today.
Well, I've had this a couple times. People have been like, hey, why don't you do a YouTube video where you answer questions? And I'm like, that's a great idea. But I think instead of just me sitting in front of a camera answering questions, I want to have one of my friends who's a WWE superstar ask me the questions. So I was actually planning on doing this at the Royal Rumble. I chat with Dolph Ziggler quite a bit. So I had said to Dolph, I said, hey, let's finally do this thing. I've interviewed you like 15 times. So let's finally do this thing where you ask me the questions. I'll write them out. I'll have them from Twitter. I'll have you write the questions. He's like, yeah, sure, man. Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it. And then all that stuff at the Royal Rumble happened, and there were all those rumors that Dolph was leaving and all that stuff. So I got to Dolph Ziggler's house, and I said, I know we're supposed to do this thing where you interview me. I said, but if I upload an interview right now with everything that's going on in your life and your career, and I don't ask you any of those questions, like, it's just not going to be a good look. And he's like, no, okay, I get it. And I said, is there anything we can't talk about? He goes, no, you can ask me anything you want. I'm like, okay. So that was actually the plan. Dolph was going to interview me, and I think that we still might figure out a time when Dolph interviews me in the future. But that was actually supposed to be Dolph interviewing me, and it turned into Dolph instead saying he's on hiatus from WWE and everything else he said in that interview.
I would watch that. I can't think of anyone better to interview than Dolph Ziggler. He just seems like a really cool guy.
Yeah, he's such a good guy.
How does it feel for you to be the interviewee rather than the interviewer?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's and I really appreciate you guys bringing me on the show. It's interesting, and I think it's, like kind of like what I was talking about. No one clicks on my videos to see me. They might be interested in, who I am or whatever, but I do realize I'm not the draw of the video. Like, if I put a video out of just me answering questions, it would not get very many views. It's interesting being on this side of it. But I think it's cool. And I thank you for giving me the platform to kind of get my story out there. And I just, if I haven't made it clear enough during our chat here, I just want to make it known that, like, I didn't do anything special. I'm not anything special or different. I had a dream, and I had a sick work ethic to chase after that dream. And that's the only difference between my channel having a lot of subscribers and views and channels that don't. That's the only difference.
Sure. I was going to ask, on the subject of, like, people you've interviewed, like Dolph Ziggler and Johnny Gargano, who I mentioned, is there anyone from, like, the early days of your interviews who you'd go back and re-interview and redo it, given that your career has grown and you've gained more experience and their careers have grown and they might have gone to do different things? Is there anyone you'd interview again a second time?
I would love another interview with Jeff Hardy, because I think my interview with him was from 2012. So we're talking 7 years ago. It has 1 million views on YouTube, which is awesome. And he talked about, he went into depth about his suspensions and his drug use, which was really interesting. But so much has changed since then. And I'd love a full a full interview with him now. I briefly interviewed him and Matt Hardy at Ring of Honor right before they made their return to WWE, which was really interesting and fun. But I would love a chat with him so I could dive into a little bit more of everything. I had a chance to meet Kurt Angle when I was still living in Canada. This is like about 10 years ago. I didn't interview him, but I chatted with him behind the scenes, and I chatted with him at a local wrestling show a couple of years ago. I would love a chance to sit down and just talk about his career and have an actual interview with him.
That would be so cool to see. Like you mentioned that you've Jeff Hardy, you interviewed him 7 years ago. So much has happened since then. And I know you got to speak to the Hardys, but to hear his thoughts on the return at WrestleMania, because I was at WrestleMania 33, and that is the craziest moment I've ever experienced in wrestling. 85,000 people came standing. There was a huge ovation, people going crazy. I get goosebumps thinking about it. It'd be really cool to hear what Jeff Hardy personally has to say on the return and everything that's happened since then. So do you reckon that's something that might be able to happen soon? If WWE would be okay with it?
That's the thing. That's the catalyst here is WWE is not usually okay with allowing a lot of interviews to happen unless it's on their terms. So I could certainly ask for it to happen, and then kind of cross my fingers and hope for the best. So I don't know. I'm going to be at WrestleMania in 2 weeks. I'm going to be in New York. I'm going to be, there with everyone. I can ask the WWE, PR people for the opportunity, but I just imagine that this is the reality of the interviews that I do. I hear no, especially from WWE, way more than I ever hear yes. And it's not a knock at them. Like, they've got really tight schedules, and often they're only in towns for, a day or less. And they've got different agendas, and I get that. And I get that I can sometimes ask questions that might push the boundaries of kayfabe, or they might be talking about things that they're not supposed to talk about, or talking about angles they're not supposed to be talking about. I get that. So yeah, I'd say with WWE, I probably hear no 9 times out of 10 when I ask for an interview.
I can imagine as well that if you got a yes, there'd be a hell of a list of do's and don'ts, wouldn't there? I mean, you can say this, but don't say this. Don't ask them that. I can imagine it would kind of maybe hamper the interview.
I haven't had a lot of interviews where they've been like, oh, don't talk about this, this, or this. But when you're doing the interview, the WWE person is standing right next to your camera person, like watching the entire interview happen. So It's kind of like a case of like, you brought a really pretty girl home from the bar, and then like their dad is like watching you.
Yeah, and this guy's probably got a little camera that's attached to him, and Vince McMahon's probably watching you from his desk.
It's pretty funny to think that like Vince McMahon actually might possibly know who I am, which is
that's thought, yeah.
That's I mean, I'm sure that maybe a clip of one of my interviews has crossed his desk at some point, and the thought of that is like completely surreal to me.
Yeah, I imagine the Dolph Ziggler one might have appeared once or twice.
Or you come up on his recommended videos when he's on YouTube.
Yeah.
Who's this guy?
Who's Chris Van Vliet?
That's amazing. You're probably right.
Speak obviously of your interviews. You've interviewed so many people. Do you have a favourite who you've interviewed?
I mean, Dolph is awesome. And I think that the great thing about Dolph is I can text him, and if we're in the same city, he'll make time for me. So I think Dolph's just an awesome, great person, and he's always very open with me, which is great. But in terms of like, there's an interview on the bucket list that I've now been able to check off. It's got to be The Rock. And I've been able to interview The Rock now, I think 9 times. And that was one. I was at WrestleMania 18. That was my first ever WrestleMania. It's my favorite match of all time. Rock Hogan. I was sitting in the 16th row watching that match. Like, The Rock is like the epitome of, like, he's my favorite wrestler, but he's like the epitome of what every wrestler should aspire to be. So, and when you meet him in person, he's everything you want him to be. He's funny. He's charismatic. He remembers your name. He makes you feel important. And
he comes across very humble, doesn't he? He's a very humble man.
Yeah, he certainly is, and he's not just a great he obviously is a great person, but he's also a great celebrity. Like he to borrow a phrase from him, he knows his role. And he knows how much power he has and how much celebrity he has, and he will make sure to make the couple minutes that you spend with him something important and something memorable. And I've actually taken a lot from those interactions and just kind of put them to other parts of my life. Like I think that we forget sometimes that like the interactions you have with other people are important. And the fact that The Rock can see how special those are, it kind of made me realize that like maybe I should, live in the moment more frequently and appreciate those moments and try to make other people feel special in those moments.
That's so cool. When you asked Jamie, like, who's your favourite person you've interviewed, I thought when it comes to wrestling and even celebrity, it has to be The Rock.
Yeah.
I think he'd be at the top of most people's list to interview. He just seems like such a cool guy in real life. I don't think he's much different to his wrestling character, if you ask me. He always just comes across as, like you said, Jamie, so humble.
He is. I mean, I've seen videos that people put on Twitter, and he's been driving down the road in his car, and he's seen fans, and he's actually gone to the bottom of the road, turned around, and come back to take photos with them. I mean, it's just so cool, and what an experience for the fan to have that experience.
Yeah, definitely.
It shows what a guy he is.
I asked The Rock, I said, he talked about he's talked about how the most difficult, or he talked about the easiest part of his job is taking a photo or signing an autograph. He's like, it's so easy. It's so easy for me to just take 3 seconds to smile. And the interesting thing about it is you will remember that for the rest of your life. Like The Rock is such a big star that if he takes 3 seconds to shake your hand and be a nice guy for the rest of your life, you're going to remember those 3 seconds as, oh, The Rock was such a good guy. Oh, he was so nice. You spend 3 seconds with him. Like, how do you know what he's like?
That's all you need. And that's going to mean so much to that person.
Yeah.
The rest of your life, you're never going to forget that moment.
We've had moments like that, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
Like when we was at StarCast and we got the chance to talk to Tommy Dreamer for about 15 minutes, but we mention it at every chance we can get. Do you remember that time we met Tommy Dreamer and we had a conversation with him? We'll remember that for the rest of our lives.
Well, it was like me, again at StarCast. I saw Sergeant Slaughter and I've got to get a picture with Sarge. And we took a picture and it meant so much to me. And I was walking away. He says, Maggot, where you going? I was like, what? He goes, we've got to take another picture of you in the the Cobra Clutch.
Oh,
so
wow.
Like, hell yes. So, like, to me, that as the little 8-year-old boy in him, he's like, Sergeant Slaughter just put me in a Cobra Clutch.
Yeah.
I'm never going to forget that moment. It was just incredible.
Yeah,
and now I take that, like, obviously I'm on TV every single day, but I get recognized now from YouTube, like, so frequently, especially when I go to wrestling shows, obviously. And if someone wants to take a picture with me, which I'm blown away by that anyone wants to take a picture with me. I'm like, I want to take a picture of the guy who interviews the people that I actually like. But when someone wants to take a picture, it's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, and I'll remember those moments, with The Rock or with other people. And it's like, if I can just be myself and be nice, I understand how much they will carry that with them. Next time they see one of my videos in their recommendations, they'll go, oh, hey, I met him at WrestleMania 34 and he was really nice.
That's cool.
Yeah. So we've got a couple more questions just to wrap up the interview, Chris.
Sure.
ESPN, the 30 for 30, we've had Andre the Giant and Ric Flair. If you were to be asked to do something along that lines, what wrestler would you want to do it with?
Like a wrestler from that era? Is that what you mean?
Any wrestler.
Any era where you're from start to finish, going in depth about their career, the way the Ric Flair 30 for 30 got portrayed.
Oh, wow. Man, that's a great question. And I think we've seen in depth with like the Ultimate Warrior as well. I think that, and we've also seen a lot with, hey, it'd be cool to peer behind the curtain with The Rock. Cause I think, that'll be my answer. I think it'd be cool to peer behind the curtain with The Rock because I think The Rock shows us what The Rock wants to show us. And The Rock is, has a great team of people that are, kind of controlling the things he puts out there. And It'd be really cool to kind of peel back the curtain. And Rock talks a lot about getting arrested, when he was younger, or, having a tough time and, getting locked out of his house in Hawaii. I think it'd be great to really dive in deep into that type of stuff with The Rock. And
that would be so cool to see. I think we'd all.
Oh, hell yeah.
I think that we all know the stories, and I think The Rock tells us what The Rock wants us to hear, but it'd be great to dive real deep into that like they did with Andre or Ric Flair.
Right. Well, I think that's all the questions we've got. What we're going to do is we're going to take a break before we record the next episode, which is going to be like our weekly review show. We've asked all of our questions, but we're going to save a few questions from the listeners to ask you in the next show, if that's cool with you, Chris.
Yeah, sounds great.
Fantastic. Right, we're going to go take a break, and we'll be back soon.
Hey guys, Omega Luke here, just to say that I hope you are loving Wrestle Thoughts just as much as I do. And just to remind you that you can start the week off right by checking out the Wise Hour of Professional Wrestling. That's me, by the way, on Brainbuster Radio every Monday. Over to you, Kurt, or Callum, or Jamie.
Welcome back to our special interview with Chris Van Vliet. So, we've discussed a lot of things, adding who you'd want to do for a 30 for 30, anybody you'd want to interview now. Something that we like to do with our guests is ask you for your Mount Rushmore. So, Chris, in terms of people that you've interviewed only, what would your Mount Rushmore be?
Interviewed only? Well, that makes it interesting. And it's funny because I just did an interview maybe the end of last year with Hogan and Flair at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. So, and it was after the interview, I did a little wrap up on my YouTube video, and I said, like, I was standing in the same room, like having a conversation and joking around with like two people that are on everyone's Mount Rushmore. And like, if Hogan and Flair aren't on your Mount Rushmore, you've got to really question your knowledge as a wrestling fan, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, so I think, so for me, it's Hogan, Flair, and I kind of did this in my interview, and it's tough when you put in the other places because it matters like when you were a fan and what was important to you and what you think is important as a wrestling fan. But I think that Austin has to be on there for me. And I think Austin's on there for me because of, he was really the catalyst for the Attitude Era. And Austin's still one of the very few people now, like if you stop someone on the street and say, name a wrestler, they're probably going to say The Rock or Stone Cold Steve Austin. And they're not going to be, they won't have heard of Seth Rollins or Roman Reigns, or they might have heard of John Cena because he was in that Transformers movie.
So true.
Which is, it's just, it's really telling of, where wrestling's at right now. And then for this last spot, it was tough for me to hammer out what this last spot was. And I think that you could give it to The Rock or you could give it to The Undertaker. And I think it makes more sense to give it to The Undertaker. I think that what The Rock has done outside of wrestling is actually more impressive than what he's done in wrestling. Like The Rock was really only a main event attraction for 5 or 6 years, which is great. I mean, for anyone to be a main eventer for 5 or 6 years is huge, but The Undertaker's staying power is just massive. I mean, we're talking, he was in the bit of the golden era, he was in the Attitude Era, and he was in every era since that. And it's not really WrestleMania, or at least it hadn't been WrestleMania without The Undertaker. Can we put, if Vince could be considered a wrestler, Vince should go on there too. But I think if we're going to go just wrestling talent alone, that's my Mount Rushmore.
That is literally, we was asked this question last week, Chris, and that is literally the Mount Rushmore that I picked.
Yeah.
Hogan,
Wow.
Flair, Austin, Undertaker, and I even mentioned Vince as well.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Like, we were debating for a while, like, should it be John Cena, The Undertaker, or The Rock? Because those to us were the only other fourth choices.
Yeah.
But for me, I went with John Cena as my final pick. You went with The Undertaker, Jamie, and that's the exact one.
That is exactly the same as mine.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting. Wow.
It's such a hard question for any wrestling fan to answer, who's your Mount Rushmore, because there's so many people you can bring into it. But like you said, you can't have a Mount Rushmore without Ric Flair and Hogan at the start. Like, that's what I imagine most people would choose. but it's always the fourth spot which is the hardest.
It is a tough question though, because you mention all them, but then you could think Bruno Sammartino, Andre.
Yeah.
There's so many to Shawn Michaels to throw on there. It's just
Bret Hart. Like it matters to you what's important. If you're 14 years old right now, your Mount Rushmore is going to look very different from what our Mount Rushmore looks like.
As long as Baron Corbin's not on it, then you know.
Well, I'm interested.
Baron's a good guy, but he shouldn't be on anyone's Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. I'm actually interested in that. You mentioned Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Are you a Shawn Michaels or a Bret Hart guy?
I think they offer two completely different things.
Yeah.
And I was becoming a wrestling fan just after the screw job and just after their real primes in WWF. And sure, I'm sure Bret Hart did some great stuff in WCW, but that's not the Bret Hart that we remember. And seeing Shawn Michaels now is it's a complete shell of the man and the wrestler that he used to be, which is also so strange and difficult to see. I think that in ring, I don't know if anyone is better than Bret Hart. Like, he truly is the best that ever was. Like, his in-ring stuff, I don't think anyone throws a punch better than Bret Hart.
I think the person close to Bret Hart would have to be Kurt Angle.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Although seeing Kurt Angle and the way he moves now, or the way he can't really move now, it's tough to see. But when you watch Kurt, from 15 years ago, wow, yeah, it would have been amazing to see Kurt and Bret wrestle each other.
Oh, that could be one of the greatest matches of all time, if you ask me.
Yeah. Seriously.
Nobody was ever as fluid, as Bret Hart and Kurt Angle. Two of the absolute most natural performers in wrestling.
And Mr. Perfect, I think Mr. Perfect's up there too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But
I'm a huge Mr. Perfect mark, so
that wasn't just a gimmick with Mr. Perfect. He really could do everything he was saying to do, which is why you bought into it. But for me personally, I'm a Shawn Michaels guy. He's my favorite wrestler of all time. There's no one greater to me than Shawn Michaels, but I can always understand why people say Bret Hart's the favorite, because, like you said, he's just so good and arguably one of the greatest ever. Yeah. But if you ask me a technical wrestling Mount Rushmore, Bret Hart's number one.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. And I think that if Bret Hart had more charisma or just was able to showcase some more personality, Bret Hart could have been, a mega star.
Oh yeah, that was always the one thing he lacked a little bit of, wasn't it? Like, he had the presence and the it factor, but he always just lacked the charisma.
If he had Ric Flair's charisma,
but it's guys like Ric Flair's a great wrestler, but Ric Flair's not as great of a technical wrestler as Bret Hart is. And Hogan has this incredible charisma and this amazing personality, but he was just okay in the ring. So I think that whatever Bret Hart lacked in his charisma, he more than made up for in what he could do inside those ropes.
Absolutely. It's why we're talking about him right now.
Yeah, exactly.
There's one thing that I do want to ask as well. Before we went on the air, I said to Callum and Jamie that I really want to do a show speaking about tag team wrestling. I think it's gone from, I know we're going through a women's evolution, but I think we've had a resurgence of good quality tag team wrestling. So if you was to do a tag team wrestling Mount Rushmore, Chris, what are the 4 teams you're putting on there?
Oh my God.
That's a good question.
Really tough question.
Jeez. Wow. I think, we'll start off easy here. I think that it's easy to throw Edge and Christian and the Dudleys on there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that if we got to go with some classic tag teams, I think that the Road Warriors should be on there. Yeah. And then I'm going to struggle for this 4th spot because there's so many incredible tag teams. And I'm a really big fan of tag teams that are organic tag teams. I don't love what WWE does where they go, hey, you don't really have anything going on, and this guy over here, you're not very over, so let's put you guys together and make you a tag team. I don't like that.
Does that mean to say you wasn't a fan of Nakamura and Rusev as a tag team?
I can't say that I was. I hate like I'm doing research right now for, different interviews that I might get coming up at WrestleMania. And it's like, I hate seeing like this person was a one-time tag team champion with someone that you completely forgot that they were a tag team champion with. And I have so much respect. I'm going to interview the Headbangers later today. And I have so much respect for the fact that those guys formed as a tag team in wrestling school. And then they came up as a tag team through the indies, then got signed from there. And it's like huge amount of respect for people like that. So I think that the fourth one on there is the Bushwhackers. And I think that, they're Hall of Famers. And it's interesting because I interviewed them and I said, you're Hall of Famers, but you never won a title. They never won the tag team titles. And they were saying, we didn't need a belt. We didn't need a belt to get over because we had this amazing gimmick. And it's so true. And if you talk to anyone that's our age, whether they're a wrestling fan or not, they know who the Bushwhackers are.
I used to walk on my living room doing the Bushwhackers walk, so yeah.
I can imagine you
still do it, yeah.
I had my head licked by Luke Bushwhacker, so I feel like I'm in an elite club. I know that's a tough question. It's kind of come up off the top of your head with, but I don't know that there's any amazing, incredible, great tag teams right now. Dawson and wow, geez, you know what I'm saying. I think that
the revival.
The revival, yeah. There we go. That's much easier to say. I think that they've got a ton of potential, and who knows, we might be talking about them in many years to come if WWE doesn't break them up, which is what they like to do with tag teams. Man, Mike, I didn't put the Hardys on there only because I think the Hardys have had such incredible careers outside of being the Hardy Boys that as a tag team themselves, I think there's better tag teams.
That's a really fair point, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
What about the Young Bucks, Chris? A big part of me, I put The Rock on my Mount Rushmore just because of what he's done away from wrestling and bringing different eyes to wrestling. In the modern era, I don't think there's been two more individuals that has transcended tag team wrestling as the Young Bucks. Like AEW is happening because of essentially their vision along with Cody's. So do you think there could be room for the Young Bucks as the modern day representatives?
Maybe one day, but I don't think as we have this conversation right now in 2019, not yet. But I have a massive amount of respect for what the Young Bucks have done. And the business mind that they have is just incredible. And I love that they, have been thinking outside the box and thinking of more than that envelope of cash that you would make at an independent wrestling show. I love that they've gone out and branded themselves, and I love that they've done the deal with Hot Topic, and then they did All In, and now they're going all in on AEW, and I think that that's amazing from a business standpoint. But I think the argument that I would have against putting them on my Mount Rushmore of tag team wrestling is there's a big differentiation between wrestling fan and WWE fan. And I think that unfortunately with everything that the Young Bucks have done in wrestling and outside of wrestling, just in the wrestling business, there's a whole bunch of people that if we were to go to Raw on Monday, wherever Raw happens to be this Monday, and we were to ask people in the crowd who the Young Bucks are, I would hate to say it, but I think there'd be like half the crowd that would go, who's that?
Yeah.
Or they'd go, I know who they are, but I've never seen one of their matches. And that's the big problem that is happening right now in wrestling. I'll use wrestling in quotations here, but it's really in WWE. Is you've got WWE fans that watch every Monday and watch SmackDown and have no idea what's going on. Like Raw down here in Miami will get 15,000 fans at the American Airlines Arena where the Miami Heat play, and then the following weekend there'll be an indie show, an independent wrestling show, a couple miles from there, and there'll be 300 people. And it's like, well, what happened? I thought there was 15,000 wrestling fans, last weekend. Where are all the wrestling fans? And the reality is maybe they're not wrestling fans. They're WWE fans.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it is.
That's true. It's the Young Bucks are mainstream, like you said, but they're mainstream to wrestling. It's like mainstream wrestling. It's not. It's in its own bubble. It's hard to get outside of that bubble and truly be mainstream like The Rock, because he has transcended wrestling and become a movie star. There's probably people who don't know that The Rock was a wrestler, if you ask me.
There are.
Yeah, which is crazy to me. Being a wrestling fan, you think, you must know The Rock was a wrestler, but it's not true. And I think you're right. You're spot on when you say there's there'll be half of the WWE universe who don't know the Young Bucks exist. And I can't see that changing anytime soon. Maybe that will change depending on the success of All Elite Wrestling. But right now, like I said, in 2019, that is the case.
And I don't think that, and Billy Gunn kind of confirmed this, and he's working behind the scenes at AEW as a producer, but he told me, they're not planning to compete with WWE. They're just planning to provide an alternative product. And if you're a wrestling fan, they'll give you something else to watch, which I think is really exciting. What I think is interesting about all of this talk about All Elite Wrestling is there's also a couple of companies out there that have been around for over a decade and have been putting out a lot of wrestling in TNA and Ring of Honor. And it's amazing that AEW, which has never had a single show, we don't know what television network they're going to be on, and we only know a handful of wrestlers that they've signed, has somehow leapfrogged TNA and Ring of Honor to become the number 2 company. Which,
yeah, that's crazy.
I understand the excitement behind it, and there's lots of money there with the Khan family. I think that's great, and we saw what they did with All In, which was really impressive. But I think we might be putting the cart before the horse here. And I'm not saying that AEW is not going to be successful. I'm just saying let's wait and see at least how Double or Nothing goes, and then wait to see their TV announcement, and then watch a couple of episodes before we go, this is the number 2 wrestling company in the world.
Yeah, that's so true. I think the only thing that might detract All Elite Wrestling is the hype right now is at fever point. Everybody is hyped for All Elite Wrestling. And sometimes if something gets hyped too much, it can never live up to that expectation. So it seems like a letdown. And I don't want that to happen with AEW. I am absolutely hyped for it, and I'd go to the shows if I had the time. But I don't want there to be, like you said, let's just wait and see. Let's just enjoy the ride and see what happens. Because we know what wrestling fans can be like, myself included. I'm guilty of this. I'll hype things up to a certain point, and then I'll be disappointed because I hyped it up so much. But I think that the best thing to do is just wait and see.
I think the reality is it's a new company, and a lot of new companies, struggle at first. And we're going to be having this same type of conversation 6 months from now. If they're doing weekly television at that point, we're going to be having these conversations where we're going to be going, why are they doing this with the storyline? They should be doing this. They should be hiring this person. We're not going to completely 100% love everything that they do. And if they are doing weekly television in the same way that WWE is, which I don't think. I think that they're probably going to have to do it out of a studio. I would have to think, because if they went to a new city every single week to do weekly television, I can't see them having a very large crowd, at least not at first. Whereas WWE is consistently putting 10, 15, 20,000 people in an arena twice a week, every week. I mean, it's really impressive.
Oh, that's absolutely true. Like you said, WWE is guaranteed to pretty much fill out these arenas every time. But there's only a certain amount of it's a good majority of people who know about All Elite Wrestling, but there's only so many shows they're going to be able to go to fill out these arenas, like an All In or a Double or Nothing. When it becomes like a monthly thing and a weekly thing, it'll be interesting to see how it keeps up. Like if they're selling out TV every time, if they're selling out the pay-per-views every time. Right now, of course, they're going to sell out All In, they're going to sell out Double or Nothing. But in a year's time, will that still be the case? I'm excited to see. I hope they do. I wish them nothing but success. But realistically, it is going to be a struggle. But if anyone can do it, it's the Khans, the Young Bucks, and Cody Rhodes. So
they've got the right people there. I'm interested to see what their television plan is. If it's going to be weekly live television, that's a lot of work. That means, you're doing it every single week. If they do it like NXT does, where you tape a couple shows at once and then air them, which is also what Lucha did and Impact did, that might make more sense for now. I mean, who knows? But if I had to guess, I think we'll be hearing a television announcement from them before Double or Nothing or at Double or Nothing. And if I also had to guess, I think they're going to land on Wednesdays.
On Wednesdays, so on the same day as NXT.
Well, which will be interesting. I mean, maybe it's Tuesday, but I think they'll be, SmackDown's going to move to Friday. So I don't know. It would balance out the week I don't know. I just have a feeling.
It won't be Mondays. We know that.
It will not be Monday or Friday.
But We do have a couple of questions from Twitter that we'd like to ask you. These are from our listeners. The first one is an unusual question, I'll admit. But
I think you did actually like it on Twitter last night.
Oh.
Yeah. Who is the best smelling person you've interviewed?
Great question, by the way.
I'm genuinely curious. I want to know.
I will say that I said it after my interview with Alexa Bliss, that she smells exactly how you would hope she would smell. She's super, small and cute, and also attractive and hot and fun. She smells great. Alexa Bliss smells how you'd want her to smell. And as a guy, Dolph Ziggler smells great. Every single time I shake his hand or hug him, I'm like, man, you smell so good. I don't know what it is. So,
can you describe it? Do you know what he was? So we can order some? Yeah.
It's just a very pleasant smell.
Is it musky?
Yeah, sure. If you ever have anyone listening to this, if you ever have the pleasure of meeting Dolph Ziggler, you will notice how nice he smells.
Well, it's top of my bucket list now, so.
There you go. To smell Dolph Ziggler.
That answers the question from Brainbuster Radio. So, Callum, do you want to go through some more of the questions that we've got?
Oh, just having a look now. There was quite a few that came in last night. We had the Mount Rushmore one. We had the best smelling wrestler, which I thought we had to ask. Was there any others from?
Yeah, so we've got one from the Badlands Pod. They do Mount Rushmore podcasting, and they're going to be part of the Brainbuster Radio. They've asked, with the amazing interviews that you've done, is there one interview that just slipped away from you?
That do you think that I haven't been able to book, or one that I got and just it didn't turn out how I wanted it to go?
We'll say both. We'll go both.
All right. Well, the interview that I'm hoping I can get one day is Triple H. And I had a poster of Triple H on my wall when I was 16. I'm a big fan of Triple H. Which is so strange that we're grown men talking about the fact that we had basically men in stretchy underwear on our walls. I had a chance right before they launched the WWE Network. Stephanie McMahon was going to be in Cleveland, where I was living, for Raw, and Stephanie McMahon was doing interviews to promote the WWE Network. And WWE reached out to me, which is one of the very few times that WWE is asking me to do an interview. It's usually me begging them to do interviews. And they said, Stephanie's going to be here on Monday. Can you do the interview? And I happened to be in Los Angeles, and I wasn't going to be back in time. I was going to miss it by 3 hours, and it just wasn't going to time out. So I always kind of have that one in the back of my head is what could have happened? Obviously I couldn't have changed my flights or done anything because I was in Los Angeles for work. But that was one I kind of wished that I could have, that slipped away. That was one that I wished I could have had because I had a ton of questions for her. But if I could ever have the chance to talk to her now, several years later, I would love that opportunity.
That would be such a cool interview, interviewing Stephanie McMahon. I mean, the amount of questions you could ask her and the amount of answers you could get from that alone would be incredible. I mean, where would you even start with Stephanie McMahon? What would you ask her if you could? Off the top of your head, one question you could ask Stephanie McMahon, what would it be?
I don't know. There's so many things I'd love to dive into because Stephanie McMahon now is in a completely different role than where Steph was 15 years ago when Chris Jericho was making fun of her fake boobs, Well, I guess that was more than 15 years ago. I think it'd be really interesting to hear from both her and Triple H, who has the final call on obviously fans aren't going to love everything.
Who wears the trousers?
Fans aren't going to love every call. And, even if the majority of fans enjoy one storyline, there's always going to be fans that don't like it. I would love to know who has the final say. I'm guessing it's Vince, but I'd love to know who has the final say in some of the storylines or some of the decisions that have been really bad. I'd just love to know whose idea it was in the end. Who was it let's run with, I don't know. I can't think of one off the top of my head that a decision I really didn't like, but I'd love to just know whose decision that was.
Just pull back the curtain a little bit and just find out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I'd love
that would be
to pull
fascinating.
back the curtain a ton.
Yeah.
Because I know we all think we know what goes on behind the scenes of WWE, being lifelong fans, but I think the reality is we have no idea how any of this actually works.
Yeah, that's so true, because there's been storylines where I've been like, well, that's definitely Vince. And then you find out, no, it wasn't. It was somebody else. And there's been storylines which have been amazing, and it was actually Vince who did it. And I think most of the time it's easy to just go, yeah, it was Vince McMahon's idea. He's out of touch. He doesn't know what he's doing. But a lot of the time, we really don't know what's going on backstage. We don't know who makes the call. So it would be cool to find that out.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I mentioned this to Alicia last week as well, though, Chris. I mean, he's doing the rounds now. Wouldn't you ever like to have the Undertaker?
$25,000 an hour.
Yeah,
I think it is. That's his rate.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be paying for any interviews, but I would love the chance to talk to the Undertaker. Absolutely. I mean, that's an interview that I've always wanted to get. I know he doesn't do a ton of them. I've seen the one on YouTube recently, and I'm sure you guys have seen it as well.
Yeah.
That interview with the pastor that he did at a church, which is, really, that's an interesting interview. I'd love to be the guy that does that. And it's interesting now that I've gotten to the stage of my YouTube wrestling career, if you will, where I've had some wrestlers reach out to me and be like, "Hey, can you interview me?" And I'm like, yeah, sure. Like, I'd be honored. I can't believe you know who I am. Or it's really interesting when I'll do an interview with someone and they're like, "Oh yeah, I've seen your interviews before," and I'm like, "Wow, that's so cool."
Well, I think a lot of that comes from, this is credit to yourself as well. Like, if you even type in wrestling once on YouTube, the recommended videos will come up with your interviews. And I think that, like, there was, for a long time, the Johnny Gargano one came up, and now if I go on YouTube, anytime recommended videos, you and Chris Jericho in the back of the car.
Yeah.
So that might be how a lot of people see, like, they'll go on YouTube once, and then Chris Van Vliet's everywhere. So.
Well, funny you should say that, Callum. When I mentioned to one of my friends that would interview Alicia too, he mentioned, it was like, oh, there's this guy that I keep seeing on YouTube that's interviewing loads of good wrestlers, like really enjoying it. It was like, oh, this is him. And I was like, Chris is coming on the podcast next week.
Yeah.
So that's somebody that is not as fixated with wrestling as he used to be, but even he's coming across your stuff.
Oh, that's cool. And it's funny that, like, when people will recognize me from YouTube, they will always talk about a specific interview. And for right now, it's the Chris Jericho in the back of the car, which I think is so funny. And I'll briefly give you the story of kind of how that one happened. And I get that me sitting in the back of Chris Jericho's car and doing an interview probably is very memorable, to watch for 20 minutes. But basically, I know him through a friend, a fellow broadcaster, one of my colleagues is friends with him. And I said, "Oh my God, can I do an interview with Chris Jericho?" And they said, "Yeah, for sure." And then 5 minutes later, Chris Jericho texted me and said, "Hey, here you want to do an interview?" And I'm like, "Oh, yes. Yeah. Wow. That was easy." So I texted him. I knew he was going to be, in Florida, and I live in Florida. And I said, "Hey, I see you're going to be at this thing in Ocala. If I drive up there, can you make time to do an interview?" He's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's make it happen." So when I got there, it was at he was doing a podcast in like a very industrial area of this kind of small town in Florida. And I pulled up in this parking lot, and I texted him. I said, "I'm here." And he goes, "I'm in the black car." And I'm like, "Where?" Okay. So I walk.
Worrying that it's not Chris Jericho and it's somebody just layering you in.
A bad episode of Catfish. So I walk up to it. He goes, "I'm in the back seat of a black car to your right," because clearly he can see me. And I go, "Okay." So I walk up to a black car to my right, and there's a woman sitting in the front seat. And I go, "Is Chris Jericho in there?" And she goes, "No." And I'm like, "Okay. Sorry." So then I call him and I go, "Where are you?" He goes, "Oh, I'm in the next car over." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, there you are." So he goes, "There's a bunch of fans out there. I don't think we should do the interview out there because, obviously the fans are, it's going to draw attention. you want to just do it here? I'm like, okay. So we kicked his driver out. My cameraman sat in the driver's seat, and we did the interview, which was so wild how that all came together.
That's so cool. I can only imagine the woman who you spoke to in the car was like, no, like, why are you asking?
It was very, it was very
slowly
weird.
locks her doors.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
Right, so before we wrap the interview up, Chris, we've just got one more question from Twitter. This is All In Wrestling 1. So Chris has had a mission and he accomplished that. Another question is, with all the people you have interviewed, is the one that you felt you need to do over just this once?
It's funny. Like, I watch some of my older stuff, or I'll try not to watch some of my older stuff. And I just kind of cringe because, like, I just don't think that I was as fluid in my interviews as I would have been now. I'd love to do that Jeff Hardy one over again. Even though it has 1 million views, I'd love to do it over again just because I think it was not great. I did a satellite interview with Stone Cold Steve Austin right when I was just starting this. I didn't even post it to YouTube. So that interview was okay, but I would love to do it over again. I'd love to do it in person because it was over the satellite. But it was Stone Cold, from my 6-minute interview I had with him, was so awesome. I was like, he was promoting whatever show he was hosting at the time. And I said to him, I said, Stone Cold, if you think that people should watch this new show of yours, give me a hell yeah. And he's like, oh, hell yeah. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is so amazing. So that's one I want back. I'd love to do a 2019 interview with Stone Cold. And you know what? I actually think I'm going to put this out into the world. I'm going to put this out into the universe. I actually think this is possible. I think if I made my way down to Texas, I think I could make this happen. Yeah.
Is that going to be one of your specific goals for 2019 or for 2020?
It is now. It is now. Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, you heard it here. Yeah, breaking.
It is now. I'm gonna find a way. I'm gonna reach out to him or try to find someone who knows him, and if I can make my way to Texas, I think I can do this.
You'll have to let us know and be like, it's happening.
Yeah.
Yes. I'll just send you a message. It's happening.
We'll know what you mean. Hey, we've just found one more question to wrap this up.
Okay.
We didn't realise how many we actually had come in. This is from the Omega Luke Wrestling podcast, who is also part of Brainbuster. They said, I'd like to know, if Chris and YouTube was around in the 90s, considering all the big star names, who would his top 3 be that he'd want to interview?
Oh man, we're going through a lot of lists here, which is
Yeah,
I love.
people love lists. It's
Yes.
Jericho.
yeah.
You just made the list.
Then we should blame Jimmy Jacobs.
Yeah, true.
That's right. Yeah. Let's see. If YouTube was around in the 90s, I think it'd be a lot of the same people that I would talk to now. Well, let's see. I think an interview with Bret Hart right after the screw job would have to be at the top of everyone's list.
Yeah.
Break the internet.
I don't think that interview would be possible, but I think that I'd be remiss to not, at least put that out there and say that that's one I'd want to do. Stone Cold during the 90s is another interview I think you'd have to do. I think I'm speaking in the late 90s because I think the 90s would be broken up into 2 very completely different eras, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Up to 95 and after 95, if you ask me.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that I'm speaking, the late 90s here.
Yeah.
An interview with Vince in the late 90s would be so interesting as he's transitioning from being a commentator into being Mr. McMahon, and as he's really peeling back the curtain and letting everyone know that, he was or is the owner of WWE or WWF at the time. I think that would be just such a fascinating interview to have him walk.
To have Vince McMahon on your podcast and have him do the Brett Screwed Brett promo on Chris Van Vliet's YouTube channel.
Oh, I can't imagine. That'd be amazing. Wow. Yeah, but just to hear Vince at that time, I think obviously an interview with Vince now would be very different, but an interview with Vince in 96, 97, as he's transitioning out and into being, into the role that we now know him in. It'd be so fascinating to just kind of hear him talk about that. So there you go. Those would be my three. And I'm going to go late 90s on that because I don't think the early 90s were as interesting as what the late 90s were in WWF.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you for answering those questions from Twitter and from the listeners. That's absolutely great to hear your insight on those. Before we go, would you like to tell everyone where we can find Chris Van Vliet on social media, YouTube, and anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, so it's just my name, at Chris Van Vliet, VanVliet. That's Twitter, that's Instagram, that's YouTube, that's Facebook. If you want to know who I'm going to be interviewing next, just follow me on Instagram. I always post stories or posts with who I'm going to do an interview with. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you've seen any of my interviews and you don't subscribe, please just click that button. It's amazing to me that, the ratio of views to subscribers is so low on YouTube in general. So, please just subscribe to me. Or as those people say on YouTube, and I can't do it. I won't do it in an interview, but smash that subscribe button. Who started saying that? What a terrible phrase that is.
It's everywhere now. Like PewDiePie says it. There's like loads of YouTubers I watch where like smash that subscribe button, smash the bell button. It's like, okay.
Bit aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sure. Smash it if that's what you'd like to do.
That's what the kids are saying these days. But thank you so much for being on the show, Chris. It's been great talking to you. We'd love to have you back at some time in the future. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Oh, I'd love to be back on. Thank you guys so much. It's been great chatting wrestling with you. And, an absolute pleasure. So thank you guys.
Not a problem.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
You're listening to Brainbuster Radio.